welcome to another video. In this video, I will be discussing a matter of energy, and I will be doing so in a slightly more calm voice. Now, in discussing the matters of energy, we must understand now as people that the human body, just as any other body of nature, which is a body of motion, and as a body of motion, you yourself have three separate energy systems, which in your diet is where you find now what causes you to have your level of energy you experience, which is also the frequency rate of energy at which you are experiencing life. So for example, when you look at something as such, which in a previous video which I've just shared, I now mentioned that the idea of type 3 diabetes is in fact the correlation between mental health and sugar addiction, which sugar addiction in itself is as a result of the glucose energy system, which you see a replacement of the glucose energy system the moment you enter into the lipids energy system, a higher state of resonant energy, where you now see that once again, if you then increase the resonant state of the energy, once again, you enter the creatine monophosphate energy system, where you find the maximum amount of power from your body. Now, how does that correlate back into the influence of our health systems? Well, specifically for one, you could say that when you look at people now that deal with mental health as a result of developing, whether it be type 3 diabetes or serotonin syndrome, which are a similar experience if you wish, regardless it is an oversaturation of serotonin, which is not being processed at that particular point. And when you look at their diet now, a person that has a high carb diet will often carry more fat on their body. Fat, also known as glucose, sugar, which sugar, compared to lipids, sugar is a slowly processed energy, which means it stores more easily, which means the more carbohydrates you eat, the more easily you will develop glucose or fat on your body. The thing they also find in high glucose diets is it causes a high concentration of sodium acetate present within the regions of the brain's neurostructure. And understanding the way lipids work, you then see that through the ingestion of things such as dairy, avocados, nuts, meats, and so on, you enter a different energy system. You would be leaner because you are not increasing the level of glucose, which we are finding out glucose, also known as sugar, is a result, the cause of mental illness, which in our sugar addicted societies, we then see why we obey to a lower resonant state of being, because we are utilizing a lower resonant state of energy, which our body learns to process. Sugar is the lowest state of energy which you may absorb glucose from. The next stage is then fats, which you then find through the use of animal byproducts like meats, bones, fish, nuts, on and on and on and on. And these animal byproducts are a living flesh. Just as a sugar, in essence, is a living vegetable flesh, the lipids themselves are as a result of a living animal flesh, mammal flesh, which then you enter the creatine monophosphate, which creatine monophosphate can actually be recreated by the use of breaking down seashells and other hair-like molecules that are found in the sea. And you can also find that in breaking down the hair-like molecules, a lot of our BCAA supplements and our creatine monophosphate supplements are actually created in Chinese prisons where they cut prisoners' hairs and make the supplements from. That is the truth about creatine monophosphate, folks. If you were to specifically look at your BCAAs, which is a supplement that feeds the recovery of your muscle fibers, you would find that it is actually made as a result of human hair. Where are they getting all of this human hair? Well, you would have to find a way to harvest that much hair, and it's not like people are lining up to shave their heads at this point. And understanding why we as humans obey a lower resonant state of consciousness, we must realize where we find our energy system obeys its optimal function, which you would find in the second food source, the lipids, to gain your energy. Because the energy, a living flesh, imagine now if in the idea of glucose, and glucose is a byproduct of vegetables which create sugar, glucose. This glucose process also affects not just your serotonin levels that your liver will then create, but it will also affect your body's ability to rebalance out in your neurotransmitter levels, which is why you see the rise of type 3 diabetes through the use of a glucose or sugar diet. In terms of the fats and lipids, you see an active living flesh in your diet, which means when you are going to build the system that makes your body, you would actively see that the fats and lipids, also known as the meats themselves, which are made of the same thing you are, not vegetable, but a living flesh. And in this living flesh is where you find that in the flesh itself is where the neurotransmitters of the animal have stored and traveled through the bloodstream, which as the neurotransmitters are released, and then at the molecular level, you then see these neurotransmitters enter bloodstream and release, which neurotransmitters have a function in muscular health. In the fats and lipids diets known as a keto diet, you then begin to see that you are actively reversing the effects of type 3 diabetes by lowering the fat or glucose content present in your body and within your mind. But you are also rebalancing out, because for the every neurotransmitter the animal you are eating had to release neurotransmitters to feel good based on its diet, it also had to release beta blockers, which rebalance out that animal's mental health. Now, how does that affect you? Well, you could say, how would you get something to build your body if you don't have the same building blocks? You would say it would cause a mutation, which if you see glucose or plant-based diets cause a mutation known as glucose buildup, sodium acetate buildup upon the body, sugar. But now if you look at the idea of fats and lipids, you see your mental health is more regulated because you are actively learning to control the fat, the true fat of the body, which is the lipids, which is what makes what is known as a Schwann cell. Imagine fat, the true real lipid of the body, if I was to look at it from the perspective of an electrical wire. The nerve cell is the copper. And now when you look at the Schwann cell, it is the insulation around the copper, the rubber. And now when you look at the actual nerve axis, you're seeing the grounding mechanism for the current to pass to the next stage. And when you break down this particular concept, you then realize how the way you insulate the electrical wire, known as your mind, how you choose to insulate your mind affects your mental health. Now we might look further into the idea of the creatine monophosphate and say, well, how come that's not an optimal energy system? Well, for one, it requires us to consume our own in order to achieve this particular level of energy. But in also understanding that in order for creatine monophosphate to work within the body, we need extreme amounts of water retention, which in itself results in a change in the physiological process that which we normally do, because too much water retention all of a sudden creates a bloating of the muscle fiber, and a bloating of the muscle fiber caused by a hyperdensity or densifying of osmosis, resulting in the muscle fiber simply just absorbing more water than it normally should. We now see that too much water, well, what happens if you drink too much water? You feel sick. What happens when your muscles drink too much water? You feel sick. And so we are actively seeing that even in our understanding of modern thirst, that we are not meant to be drinking glass upon glass upon glass upon glass upon glass of water. Because you see, if we were to look back at our ancient past, where we would have come from the wilderness as humans, whether you choose to believe in the faith of the Bible or not, in terms of evolution, we would have come from the wild, which means we are simply a civilized animal who learned to build things together. And as a civilized animal, the thing about water in ancient times was it was very difficult, if not completely impossible, to make clean drinking water. And so if we could not find an outside source of drinking water, well, we had to find a source of living water, also known as fruits. And an understanding of fruits in the living water aspect of things, when you begin absorbing living water, you process it at a much higher potential in your absorption, because it is now an electrolyte and not just water. It has a sugar to it, which is the true only way we are meant meant to actually induce sugar. We should not be inducing sugar through our diet, specifically by adding sugar to our drinks, foods, on and on and on and on. We should simply be utilizing the true sugar the current state of a fruit presents in itself, because that is what creates an electrolyte, which has a much greater potential capacity of creating hydration. And so when you look now at the way we are hyper soaking ourselves in water, well, this causes a bloating of cells. A hyperdensifying or concentration of water results in a split or a bloating where your cells are pushing themselves apart. And this resonant state, you may not necessarily just experience more physical strength, but you also feel more mental aggression because of this inflammation you're stimulating through higher levels of water concentration found at your cellular level. You're drowning yourself at that point. And so when you look now back to a keto diet, which is the idea of eating a living flesh, a flesh just like yours, the idea of eating fruits that are a living water, just like you, and on and on and on and on until ultimately you arrive at a new mental health, where you see your lower once resonant self, which if we now understand how not just food itself, but the chemicals we put in our food itself. What do you think happens if I introduce a chemical